Hello there. How are you?
Hi, I am doing so well, Tracy. How are you doing today?
So far, so good. Can't complain. And we're, past 5 o'clock my time. So if we've made it to five, I think we're okay today.
That's wonderful. That's so great. Well, I'm happy that you get to close out your day with me.
Yeah, me as well. This is quite a positive way for me to round out the day. So thank you for taking the time.
Well, on that note, I will go ahead and kick this off with the same three questions I ask every podcast guest, which is hello, hi, who are you? How do we know each other? And where can people find you online?
Sure, sure. Well, first of all, I am well. Thank you. Hope you're doing well as well. It was a lot of wells, but but we connected via LinkedIn. I don't know if we had a mutual connection, but you popped up in my feed and I was like, "Oh, this lady seems interesting and she has a podcast. Let me reach out." So that's kind of how we became acquainted. And I feel like in this virtual age, this is how most people become acquainted nowadays, and then where to find me, I can be found on my website. I have all my social media attached to it, and the website is chasingwonderful.com.
Wonderful. Chasingwonderful.com. I love the word wonderful. I feel like I use it way too much. Like anytime I hear a speech I did, I'm like, wow, I said wonderful. It's not as wonderful if you keep using it. I love the word. So I love that you made that chasingwonderful.com. And we'll go ahead and link that down below in the show notes for anybody who just wants to go ahead and click away. But yes, I found you through a write up somewhere online and I just was really inspired by her story. I was like, I'm going to reach out to her, see if she maybe wants to join my podcast. I think I saw the write up about your travel business. And where that really spoke to me is that my mom is a travel agent. And the travel industry, I know a decent amount about it just through my mother. But I know that the focus is like creating experiences, which is exactly what I do in business marketing. Like a big part of what I'm doing is creating memorable experiences for consumers so they have a positive memory of us and then they're coming back to our products. Can you talk about the type of experiences you want people to have when they work with you?
Sure, sure. That's a great question. And I think it's kind of twofold. On the one side, company meetings, we've all been to them, business meetings for whatever type of organization we're working for. And a lot of times they can be a little tedious and monotonous, not necessarily the most exciting thing when you're just having information spewed at you for several hours, several days. So I think the thing that I want to bring to that experience is that you can have a meeting that is productive and enjoyable and memorable to your point. Not everything needs to just be you sitting there for 8 hours and staring at, a screen with numbers on it. One memorable event experience that I had personally was when I was doing a sales training years ago. And in between all the information, they had us do team activities and different games. And one of them was movie trivia. And it was really obscure. It was like they were asking you, they would say a quote and they wanted you to name the movie, the actor, and the year it was created. Like it was a lot of detail that most people don't know of a movie. But that was what I was built for. I was built for movie trivia. And I was like, I got this. And we went through probably like 27 questions. And I think I got about 24 or 25 correct. And a wide range of movies like Gone with the Wind and movies from like the 30s and 40s all the way up to present day, and we dominated it. And I remember one of the girls on the other team was like, well, I wasn't around when a lot of these movies were created. I was like, well, I wasn't alive with Clark Gable either. Don't be bitter about it. But it was like such a memorable experience for me because like, do I remember, all the numbers and sales information we were going through? No, but I remember that experience and that bonding experience with the group and my team and things like that. So that's one thing that I'm trying to bring to my events, that experience, and not everything just needs to be your eyes glazing over. And the next thing is attention to detail. I started my career working in operations for the Ritz-Carlton in Miami. And when you're a kid right out of college, you're like, why does it matter which way the teacups are faced? Like, who cares? Why are we focusing so much on these minutia details? And then you realize it's not necessarily about the teacups or how they're facing. It's just having the customer or the guest or the attendee or whatever you want to call them have a seamless experience where they don't need to ask for something simple or wonder where something is. You've thought of it for them. And I can't tell you how much I am ruined for life of going to an event or a banquet or something like that. And I'm like, that shouldn't be here. This should be here. Why did they do it like this? This buffet's backwards. It's just a constant thing that becomes ingrained in you after a while. So it's the experience and learning and playing together as well as the attention to detail. So the guests don't have to worry about things.
Yeah, I have been to my fair share of national conferences, and I always say a huge thank you to the event manager, whoever it is. Normally, it will be someone internal. Sometimes my companies that I've worked for would hire someone externally to manage it. And I'm like, wait, your entire job is this national training? And they're like, yeah, I start planning it the day it's over. I'm like, what? Because, we're bringing in hundreds of people from all over the world, right? From multiple countries into a city. And since I used to live in California, I swear every freaking national, it was at least 50% of the national dam trainings that I would go to. I'm like, you got to come all the way over here from Dublin, and yet I'm just stuck here up the street in California. These meetings are always in California because everyone wants to be in California. It's so frustrating. But I will say, on the note of positive experiences, I will I remember some of the things, like we had some cool speakers and some of the learnings, but they weren't specific to the sales numbers like you said. They are specific to the experiences. And one that I want to share, since you brought up the movie trivia, it just sparked a memory in me, and I want to share this because if anybody encounters this, you got to keep this in your back pocket. Game changer. So I'll try to describe it, but you'll have my hands, Tracy, so you can see what I'm talking about. You know those boxes where the money is blowing and you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
like grab all the money? Okay, so one of my national trainings had that. They had it, and they were drawing names, and so I think there were 10 of us. And in this money box there was like $100 bills, $50 bills, but mostly ones, fives, and tens. And I've seen those, like they're not covering us in glue or anything. It's just you had to grab it. And everyone's going up there and they're grabbing for the money when it's their turn, right? So they did a random drawing of names, and I was the last name called. I never get called for anything. This was like the only time in my life I got picked for something, and I was like, I got picked because I literally, whenever there's raffles or anything, I just never get picked. It's fine. It is what it is. I've learned to accept it. So I just kind of check out because I'm like, I'm not gonna get picked. I never get picked. But this time I got picked, and that's what I screamed when they called my name. But someone behind me was like, hey, just cross your arms as so. So I'm going to show you here, but like kind of cup your hands over your elbows and have your chest there and just stand still. Don't grab for the money, just stand still. That's what they told me. And I was like, look, I saw everybody else grabbing for money and they're getting like $50 or $22 because again, it's a lot of $1 bills. And I was like, what do I have to lose? Like, you know what I mean? So I just stood there and I got over $400.
Oh,
One
wow.
Yeah, because it just sucked in. And what I realized is that when you cup your hands over your elbows, and it kind of creates this bowl of a vacuum, so all the air sucks in the dollar bills into your arms, but then it
Huh.
doesn't blow it out. So I just, for anybody listening, if you're ever in one of those money boxes, and I think that's really poetic, which is what we're going to talk about today. I didn't plan on telling that story. These things just
I
come out.
love it though. It was a good ad.
But it's a really good reminder that sometimes we don't have to grab all the time to get the
Yeah.
most success. Sometimes we just need to stay where we are and observe, and the opportunities will come to us. And when we're busy grasping and trying and working really hard and going, we're actually not getting the results we want. And I think that when you become a business owner, it's that constant balance of, yes, I want to hustle. Yes, I want to push myself forward, but also I need to like know who I am, what I'm bringing to the table, and trust that what is mine will come to me. I'm all for creating opportunities, but I just thought that was a really poetic segue. But anyway, and so if you're in that position, I hope you get that because, like I said, it totally worked. It's like science. Um, Post 2020, the travel industry, like I can say again through my mother and through myself, I mean, flights are expensive as ever. It feels like they're really trying to compensate for loss in 2020. And I know that the industry got hit hard. I know that there were mass layoffs in the travel industry. And I'm wondering, like, has it bounced back? And how do you decide to switch lanes and create your own travel business in the face of a pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think it's bounced back from what it was pre-pandemic. I mean, you hear the numbers when you're watching the news on travel during the holidays, and they're comparing it to, pre-2019 numbers and things like that. I do think that a lot of the industry did go a little bit leaner. So it's an industry that's going to get hit hard in situations like this. So I think, just numbers of employees and things like that. I also used to work for a hotel that had a robot, and that probably sounds very far out techie, but it was just like this, waist high. And when I say waist high, I'm 5'3", so it's not very high, but this like waist high little, cylinder looking thing, and the top opens, and the front desk would, could put in like towels or toiletries. So instead of an associate running up and down to each room, they would program it if somebody called down and said, "Hey, can I have some soap or a towel or whatever it was?" So I think businesses, especially hospitality businesses, are becoming, more lean in their employment and the amount of staff that they have on retainer. So I think that that's one way that they're kind of, mitigating it. But I do think the actual travel has, I don't want to say it's exactly the same, but it definitely is, up since 2020, and obviously that horrible year for literally everybody. But when it came to pivoting, I think it had a lot to do with just where I was in my career. I don't think I would have been as confident or comfortable starting something when I was right out of college. It wasn't something, there's people who are entrepreneurs and have a vision in their mind of this is what I want to do, the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates of the world. I wasn't necessarily that person. So I think it was good for me to build a foundation. I didn't know what I wanted to do at 22. I was very aimless and just kind of taking jobs and traveling around, and then kind of fell into hospitality and event planning. But I think a lot of why I pivoted into starting my own company in 2024 was kind of being pushed into a corner. There's people who get pushed into a corner and they either fold from it. I don't have the luxury of folding from it. I don't necessarily have anybody to fall back on financially or for resources or things like that. So I could either, cry about it. But I'm much more of an in-house sort of person. I've always worked in-house. I've always worked for venues or different corporations. But the job market over the last year or so, I mean, definitely since 2020, but the last year or so has just been a wave, a wave of emotions. But so it was really just being pushed into a corner is really how I came down to it. I was looking for in-house opportunities, and then I just thought to myself at one point, how much time did I waste focusing on applying and interviewing and tailoring my resumes and networking and reaching out to contacts and all this stuff when I could have been doing something for myself? And would I have been a millionaire now? No, but well, maybe I would have been, I don't know. But I spent all this time and energy and resources applying for companies, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter what roles I was applying for. I was applying for roles that were within my wheelhouse, and then I was applying for roles that were very junior to what my experience level is. And I don't mean that from an ego standpoint. It was just numbers of, I'm applying to jobs that are requesting, 1 or 2 years of experience, and I'm still getting turned down for them. And so at that point, I was like, well, enough time has been wasted. Let's let's move on and figure out what we can do to, overcome this, because we're not in a day and age where things are just handed on silver platters anymore. People are rarely just recruited off of college campuses and just handed jobs these days. So you can spend your time, trying to create something or trying to find something. It's, your decision, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying absolutely resonates with so many of us. I mean, whether it's looking for a job or trying to change industries or anything, there are a lot of transitions, and I think we know that with any election year in the United States comes economic uncertainty. So it was 2020 on top of the pandemic, right? That was also an election year. And we're in one now. It's not we're coming up. We're in it here
Uh,
and now. And I think there's a lot of economic uncertainty there. And what you're saying is absolutely a testament to the importance of having a diverse streams of income,
yeah.
diverse streams of revenue. I think that more and more we are seeing that working for a company and the typical trajectory and the job security lack thereof is absolutely why so many of us, such as myself, are starting a business and saying, okay, I need to have some more control here and just frankly equity, to balance the sweat equity. I'm similar to you. I have the confidence because I have helped build other businesses, other brands, so forth. I see how businesses run. I've had budgets that I personally, to your point, right? Like, I don't know that I'll ever be a multi-billionaire, but I know I've been able to operate on behalf of one. It just was a company, not a person. And so when you have access to a lot of resources, you can then scale that down a little bit to say, okay, where can we go bare bones? Here are the resources available. And I wouldn't have that if I just built everything from scratch, the Bill Gates way, as you so eloquently put it, straight out of college. So I think that that's wonderful. When you look at what's happening like in the past 4 years, and I can't help but think that there's a parallel between what we're dealing with now with the economic uncertainty, the housing market, the confusion, the apprehension, and that there might be some parallels to 2008. When the 2008 recession happened, I was working, and I was in school, so I was getting a taste of it, but I didn't have the reality of it. My career, I was a freshman in college. My career was nowhere near formatted yet. But can you tell me a little bit, like economically, like what kind of impact 2008 had on you and your career and where you were?
Yeah, it's funny because I graduated about a year or so before the 2008 recession hit. In 2007, it was kind of, we saw it coming, so to speak. But again, I was a naive 22-year-old who, didn't understand the job market even out of a recession, didn't understand what I wanted to do. So combining that with uncertain economy and, not a lot of job opportunities, and combining that with naivety, it was very difficult for me to find a job and a path. Um, I traveled around a lot at that time, so I mean that was a benefit to it. I definitely got to see a lot of this country. I did a road trip to California from New Jersey. I traveled around Europe for 2 months. So the positive of it is my wandering allowed me to see an amazing part of this world. And I think I was in like 11 countries within that year and 10 or 15 states and things like that. So it was such an amazing experience, but didn't help me landing a job any quicker. It probably delayed me a little bit. So it's, when I look back on my career, I'm like, I still love that experience and I'm so glad I had it. But would it have been a little bit different if I started pounding the pavement right on graduation day? Um, but yes, it was very difficult for me to find a job initially in 2008, and I was looking, applying, and then finally my parents said, okay, well, why don't you start volunteering? Like, you don't have experience, start volunteering for organizations that you're interested in, so you get something on your resume. So I started doing that. I started volunteering. I joined AmeriCorps for a year, and it set me down to Miami, which was a polar opposite from what I was used to. I grew up in a tiny town in New Jersey, so living on South Beach was a complete 180. So gave me a little bit of that travel itch that I so needed, scratch that itch, so to speak, and then also gave me a little bit of experience. And I'm still very close with a lot of people that I knew from that year in AmeriCorps. So that's kind of how I got started, and then just fell into a job in hospitality, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. But it was a project. It was definitely work to kind of get up and running.
Yeah, and I will say earlier you talked about applying for roles, including roles where you had significantly more than 1 to 2 year experience, and yet you were applying for those roles. Um, Gosh, as a hiring manager, we could have a whole conversation about this because I'm like, there are so many misconceptions about hiring, and it's so frustrating, and there's so much gatekeeping, and it's just like, and I can only speak for the companies that I've worked with or worked for. I can't even speak for every company, so who knows, but the recruitment strategies and pipelines are just a hot mess. It's like you have so many vacant roles that need talented people, and you have so many talented people who need a role, and yet somehow we're never able to make the 2 meet. Um, it's exhausting.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
disappointing. Yeah, and it's exhausting as a hiring manager as well. Anytime I interview with someone, I always thank them for their time because whatever they're interviewing you for, like that interviewing is not a job. There's no job where you're just interviewing people. Maybe HR, but those interviews aren't, those are very high level, they're not detailed. But if
Yeah.
someone is interviewing you, like definitely understand that they have a full-time job that they're doing on top of interviewing you, and understand that like they don't want their time wasted any more than you do. Yes, you are under pressure because you're looking for a role, but also they're under pressure because they need to fill a role and they're probably taking on a lot of those responsibilities in the interim. And it's very, I would argue, outside of the financial constraints, being like, so of course, like if you're desperate for a job because you need to make money, like outside of that, removing that, because of course then it goes on the applicant. But if I would say it's almost more work on behalf of the hiring manager because you have to sell the company, you can't be fully honest about some of the crap that you need figured out, and you need someone talented because replacing someone makes you look bad. So if like for you, yeah, you look bad but you're leaving the company, but if I make the wrong hire, like that's a reflection on me and my recruitment, and it's very, very stressful, and I don't know that it's underscored enough, in the recruitment process. So sometimes, we have a lot of compassion and empathy for the applicants, but there's a lot to be said with the hiring managers. On that note, though, when you are frantically, desperately, or just endlessly applying for roles, that rejection is so hard, even if you don't even really want the job. It's like getting that rejection, these limiting mindsets kind of pop up, like, "You're never gonna be wanted, nobody's ever gonna like you." Getting ghosted is hard in its own right too. I don't think companies should be doing that. I think they should have an option on applications, like, "Do you want us to ghost you and just never reach out if we're not interested? Do you want us to send you a text, or do you want us to reject you via email?" Like, I think they should have that so we can just decide what's best for us, because I actually don't need a rejection email. Like, I don't. If you're interested, fine. I don't expect to hear from companies. I don't need to wake up to a rejection email. But I know some people don't like to be quote ghosted, so that's why I'm like, to each their own. But it
Yeah.
is hard because for me, like, I take those rejections so personally, even though I know I shouldn't. It's hard, and I'm in sales, and rejection is a part of sales, so I know that it's 90% no's, and so I look at interviewing as like just practice for that. It's like, okay, every no leads me closer to a yes. That's how I approach it. But even for me, with my thick skin, I'm still like, oh, it's just so hard. How would you suggest, or how did you bounce back and figure out a way to stay positive as you're kind of dealing with the rejections that you mentioned, and staying motivated through that?
Sure, sure. So I guess, the one question on motivation, it's more of a need than a desire, right? Like most of us need jobs. So I don't necessarily have the luxury of being like, this hurt my feelings. I have my days, don't get me wrong. There are days where I've tried to curb it where it doesn't happen to me often, but there are days where I was like, I can't apply for another job. I am leaving this house. I am leaving my computer and I'm walking away. Like, because if I stare at this computer and one more email or one more LinkedIn message, I may scream. So, like, we all have those days. But I always joke with my mom that I have an unusual amount of self confidence and I don't necessarily know where it comes from. So, when I'm not having those random off days, I'm very comfortable with the fact that, like, I almost have this "what's wrong with you?" Feeling when I'm getting these rejection emails when it's so simple, like auto emails that are just like, I haven't had an interview and it's just an automatic, rejection to my application. Those don't phase me in the slightest. Um, obviously when I don't get a job, I can rationalize with myself at this point in my career that am I more upset about just not having a job and needing that stream of income, or am I upset about this job? And most times when I take that step back, it definitely helps me a lot to not, get overwhelmed or too upset about it. But I will say that I definitely have that stereotypical New York City metro area personality where I can go from 0 to 60 very, very quickly. And I knew this about myself, and I didn't like how most of my life I'd been very reactive, like right or wrong, yes or no, like that's not okay. And so around when the pandemic happened, like I knew that I had the capacity of just kind of like going off the deep end, and I didn't want to continue like that. So I've taken a lot of cognizant steps to reel myself back in. So like I'm very like keep myself within a box of like I wake up at the same time, I go to bed at the same time, I try to exercise before work, 4 to 5 days a week. I've been trying to like incorporate meditation and different things like that to kind of reel myself back in. I still can go 0 to 60 very quickly, but definitely not as extreme. And so I think that that helps me with when I'm getting the rejection emails or things aren't going in my favor, it's allowed me to take a step back and think like, how do I want to react to this? And I do notice how like little things, I used to get annoyed if I would drop something or bang into something, little things like that. And I even notice now I just broke a glass the other day and I was like, okie dokie. And I was like, old me wouldn't have known me. Like I was just like, okay, let's pick up the pieces. And that's just kind of like the metaphor for life, right? Like things are gonna break, just pick up the pieces and move on. So
Oh, I love that. I mean, it's so true. And to recognize your evolution, I think is incredible and super just elevated, enlightened, because to recognize, all right, if you can look back and see where you developed and evolved, then you can admit that maybe I didn't always handle everything perfectly, and maybe I need to cool this down, and maybe I need to chisel here and chisel there, and that's all we can help to do is chisel one another and chisel ourselves, and really just try to refine ourselves in the best ways possible. I what I hear from you is that one of the sources of your confidence and your strength and your resilience, your ability to bounce back comes from the culture in which you grew up with when you say like this New York metro like area. And I'm wondering, would it be the same if you had grown up in Iowa? Instead, or if you grew up in an environment where you didn't have that pervasive. I always find this fascinating about the East Coast compared to the West Coast culturally, right? We don't have Ivy Leagues on the West Coast. And, our Ivy, quote unquote, is Stanford, which is not technically an Ivy League university. The Ivy Leagues sit on the Northeast of the US. And so what that means is they're going to feed from those schools more likely, and so there's just more of an emphasis, I would say, on education, higher education, on the East Coast. Now people don't like when I say that because they're like, oh, California's got great schools, Washington, we have great schools in the West. Well, we don't have Ivy Leagues, y'all. We just don't. It's a different level. I'm sorry. Like, if you know anyone from an Ivy, it's different. No offense to Stanford, which is an amazing, and that's it's our West Coast Ivy. Yes, they're amazing, but it's not the same. And I do think that has an effect. In On the West Coast, we care more about looks and being active because we're half naked all year long because the weather's good, right? So there is like y'all got the brains, we got the looks. I hate to say it so bluntly, but there's just a different emphasis because the weather is shit and you're not half naked. And I've been to Montauk, y'all. It's not the same emphasis, okay? It is not the same emphasis on summer bod as it is in California. And so there's a lot more emphasis on looks. I'm not saying it negatively or positively. These are just my experiences of having worked in New York and worked on, being from the West Coast. Do you think you would have the same level of confidence if you didn't come from a hustle bustle resilient culture? And what advice might you give to someone like either, a version of yourself that doesn't come from New Jersey, or someone who's just a little younger, less confident, less experienced? How would you tell them that they could build their confidence?
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's that nature versus nurture question. I'm sure if I was the same person, same family, growing up someplace else, I'm sure that would probably impact things. Just, growing up in that area, I remember pictures of me as a toddler being wheeled around in a stroller in Times Square. I mean, it was just a very different environment. And to not only be walking yourself around midtown Manhattan, but a 2-year old and a 5-year old, I'm sure that took a lot for my parents. But if you know anything about New York, you have to walk around with confidence because there's a lot of crazy people or people who are going to push you around or literally just walk into you because Times Square and midtown and New York City is very overcrowded. And so it's funny when I travel, I walk around like I know where I am, and 90% of the time, I have no idea. So much so that I've gotten stopped in so many countries by people saying, "Oh, can you give me directions?" I was like, "I have no idea where I am. I don't know where I am. Like, I got here 6 hours ago." But so I think it's that sense of fake it till you make it. Even if you're not feeling confident, when you're in New York, you just need to literally just seem confident in what you are doing. And I guess that's like a literal and a metaphorical, sort of confidence. But I think that just kind of transitioned into, my life. When I was little, I just assumed adults had all the answer. And then I kept growing and I'm like, why don't I still know these answers? And I realized, oh, the adults don't know it either. So you just kind of have to wing it. And it's not that you ever just get this book of answers. It's just that you've experienced things more than once or a lot of things. So you just feel more comfortable with a lot of situations than when you were a kid or maybe in your late teens or late 20s. Um, but I think if I had to give advice to my younger self or somebody who's just starting out, it's funny because I think that sometimes there's a balance between confidence and overconfidence and a lack of confidence. And finding that right balance is definitely, it's a chess game of, nobody likes that 21-year-old who's got all the confidence in the world. And I'm like, what have you done? Why are you so confident that your answer is the right one? By the time you get a little bit older, you realize I could be right, but I could be wrong. It could, we could do things this way or we could do things that way. Um, so I think I probably just, the advice to building confidence is something my mom told me when I was younger is you're no better than anybody else, but you're no worse than anybody else either. And that really kind of stuck with me growing up, that to help with my confidence of, you have a right to be here. You're no worse than anybody else, but don't walk around like you're better than anybody else either. And so I think that one line has always kind of stayed with me, that like, yeah, don't walk around super cocky, but I deserve to be here as well. So
Ooh, I really love that, and I've never heard it phrased that way, and I think it's beautiful. I think that's beautiful. I love that your mother said that. I will say that I had a few surgeries in December 2022, and it was really traumatic and blah 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 blah. First time I left the house and I was pushing a shopping cart. I was healed over the shopping cart, and I just needed to get out. I just needed to be somewhere public. And as I'm hunched over, I had this realization as I look around. I'm like, oh my gosh, just like you were talking about in New York, I thought, if anybody wants to rob me or anything, like I'm so clearly weak because I'm hunched over and moving very slowly. I was wearing a huge diaper. It was just a terrible hot mess of me just trying to pretend to be a normal person for a day after being cooped up in a bed. And it was in that moment that I realized, holy crap, I can't defend myself if someone tries to attack me right now. And whether it is true or not, because I um trained and practiced and worked out martial arts for most of my life, I've always had this air of confidence that I didn't know came from my martial arts background because in any room, I don't care if you're a billionaire, I don't care if you're the CEO, I literally don't care. Like, I'm very confident and comfortable because in the back of my head, I'm like, well, if shit hit the fan, I could kick someone's ass. Like, if it really, like, forget your title, forget your fancy clothes, like toe to toe. If we both got naked here and brawled, I would hold my own. And I didn't realize that I kind of walked in everywhere feeling that way. It was very subconscious because of this idea of I don't want to be taken advantage of because I know I'm hyper aware of all my limitations. I'm hyper aware that I'm a woman, I'm a minority, I'm the youngest, I'm the least experienced, whatever it is. But in the back of my head, my source of confidence was okay, but if we had to go boxing, I would win. Like that was my source of confidence. And I never realized how much that was my source of confidence until I completely lost it and thought if someone attacks me right now, I could not defend myself. And it was so vulnerable and so scary. And I would imagine that if there were some circumstance where you had to go back to New York after years of walking those streets and pounding pavement, and you were in a situation where you felt extra vulnerable, you would be hyper aware of, oh my gosh, I don't have this source of strength that I once did. And I think that I like your version better because mine is still comparing to people and in some way I'm saying I am better than you. Not I'm not smarter than you. I'm not wealthier than you. I'm not more experienced, but I'm more experienced on this front of physical self-defense if something were to happen. And I like this idea of no, like I'm neither better, I'm neither worse. I belong. I love that. I think that's brilliant and beautiful. I'm so happy you shared that with me. I'm gonna take that.
Yeah, use it away. And it definitely has helped me, keep myself in check, but also, keep myself in check on both ends, right? Like, don't get carried away with myself, but then also don't cower in the corner either. So,
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'm just so grateful for your time today. And as we close out, I'm very interested to hear your answer. Because I have this philosophy that I developed. It's called the SEF philosophy, and it stands for spiritual, emotional, financial, and physical. And the idea is finding success and balance in all dimensions and figuring out, where do we feel really strong and where can we sit in our strength and where do we need to develop a little bit more and where do we want to focus on evolving in a better way. And I'm curious, like within the SEF model, like where you feel the strongest and where you hope to develop.
sure, sure. I think probably right now where I feel the strongest would probably be emotionally. And I know that sounds weird for somebody who, is trying to start a new business, has been looking for jobs for a really long time, started their career in a economic downturn and has had, had to ride a wave of ups and downs with careers. But I think that's a one thing that I love about aging. When I was little, or not even little, but like, a kid or, high school, college, early 20s, I couldn't keep things in perspective. I would get stressed out, very easily over the littlest things. If a friend moved away or, got in a fight with somebody or whatever the situation was, didn't get something that I thought, was going to go a certain way. Where now, like I was saying earlier, I can keep myself in check and keep myself pretty even and how I respond to things, and I'm very mindful on how I'm responding to situations, not only like physically responding but also like verbally what I'm saying. um so much so that the other day I was talking with my mom and she's like, I thought you said that you're such a mellow person. And I was like, no, no, mom, I didn't say I was mellow. I said I had the capability of being way worse. People are lucky that I am filtering 90% of what I'm thinking. But yeah, so I would say emotionally, like I'm in a good place compared to where I felt I was in my 20s or teens. Um, and then for me, I guess the area of opportunity is financially, where is my next step? How do I build up a consulting business and not have to be so reliant on an employer or company and the economy and all these different things? So that's probably the area of opportunity. But I mean, I think there's in everything, strengths that you have in each category, and then also areas of opportunities. Emotionally, is there room for improvement? Sure. And the, um, other standpoints are, is there room for improvement or great strength? Absolutely. It's just where I think I'm succeeding and working on at the moment.
I love that. And you know what? It's so funny you say that 90% thing because my mother says that too. Maybe this is like a travel agent thing because she says the same thing. She's like, no, you're lucky that this is all you got. Be grateful. She says the same thing, and similar to you, she comes across as I think you come across, like, tougher than you do, like, you come off to me very sweet, Polly purebred, and so does my mother, but since she's my mother, I know she's not sweet Polly
Yeah.
purebred, but she very much comes off very bubbly, big smile, just like you, but when I hear you say that, I'm like, "Oh, she's not kidding.
Yeah,
She's not
she's not
kidding."
joking around. My old coworker used to always laugh whenever she would see my notes in the system. She's like, "What you're writing just sounds very basic, like you're telling me the information that I need to know. But if I read it in your tone of voice, it is way funnier." And she's like, "I'm reading it with all the sarcasm it's intended." And I'm like, "You betcha."
I love that. Well, Tracy, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think it's really inspirational for anybody, which I know this year a lot of us are going through transitions, but just a reminder to stay the course and being able to create our opportunities so we can find a better version of ourselves. I'm such a believer that when we love who we are at work, just become better people in our personal life, and I think that you're showing us that. So thank you so very much for coming here and being on this podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening in to Eavesdrop with Ella. If today's episode inspired you, please subscribe, rate, or review Eavesdrop with Ella on your favorite podcast platform. While you're at it, you should also send this episode to a friend so we can connect with more eavesdroppers just like you. If you'd like to be a guest, you can visit ellaparlor.com to learn more. Until next time, this is Ella Parlor reminding you to stay resilient, stay abundant, and above all, stay balanced. Thank you for eavesdropping, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Eavesdrop with Ella, a production of EP Consulting. Some of the products and services mentioned are paid promotions, and any advice should be confirmed with a qualified professional. Opinions and ideas are for entertainment purposes only and belong to EP Consulting. All rights reserved.